Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up.
Parks are truly superfoods for communities. They're places to play and be active and healthy. They help provide spaces for neighbors to meet each other and help combat loneliness and isolation. And they can help cool neighborhoods and act as sponges and help really establish a sense of place and welcoming in our cities.
We put the spotlight on parks as we assess the full length and breadth of benefits that a public green space can have on a city. Then we head to one of the most German cities in Canada to see how the town glockenspiel brings residents together. And finally, we investigate the ancient art of letter carving to find out how this craft is being nurtured and passed on to future generations. That's all coming up over the next 30 minutes here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. In September this year, the US-based Trust for Public Land released new research exploring how city leaders are attracting new companies and encouraging new development through expanded investments in public parks. The power that public green space has is not surprising for us here at The Urbanist, but at a time when office vacancy and downtown decline weighs heavy on the minds of those involved in building better cities, seeing the data behind the effect that parks can have is truly invaluable. To learn more about this research, Monocle's Carlotta Rebello was joined recently in the studio by Bianca Clark, Senior Director and Parks Initiative Lead at Trust for Public Land. Carlotta began by asking Bianca where the idea to produce this study came from.
The Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit, and we work to build parks and protect land for people to ensure healthy, livable communities. So we partner with communities to help build parks, trails, schoolyards, and also provide a roadmap and support for cities to help build strong and sustained park systems. And we do this because parks are truly superfoods for communities. They're places to play and be active and healthy. They help provide spaces for neighbors to meet each other and help combat loneliness and isolation. And they can help cool neighborhoods and act as sponges and help really establish a sense of place and welcoming in our cities. However, we also know that 100 million people in the US lack access to a park. That's 1 in 3 US residents and 28 million children. And solving that park equity divide is essential for ensuring all of the benefits of parks are available for residents and for visitors alike. But we also know that filling that gap and solving the park equity divide requires significant funding, capacity, policy change, and time, all while communities and city leaders are faced with many competing priorities. So we know that there's housing shortages, that there need to be more jobs. There's the importance of ensuring affordability and equity and justice and opportunity in our cities. But we also know that parks play a very important role in all of that work and that they are really essential. They're a glue for our communities. They are that superfood for making sure that we continue to grow neighborhoods and communities that provide everybody the opportunity to thrive and flourish. And one of the key things that we wanted to dig into was this connection between parks and economic vitality. Economic opportunity, inclusive growth, the diversity of economic growth in cities is really important for the sustainability of our places and of our residents and communities. And so we launched this work with HRN advisors as a key step in digging into that connection.
One of the interesting things here is how the research shows that cities that are investing in parks and open spaces are able to retain this workforce that is diverse and skilled. And that, as a consequence, also means that companies then want to come back to the cities or want to relocate to start to expand businesses that have made these investments into green areas. Tell us a bit more about that relation there.
So this report, we looked at 5 U.S. cities to explore how and why they're investing in park spaces through that lens of ensuring that these are places people want to move to, that businesses want to be there, that real estate will continue to evolve. And what we found was that city leaders and private sector partners alike are investing in parks because of those benefits, regardless of where the city is located, so different geographies, locations, city histories. And notably, these examples show a wide variety of ways that this is happening. For example, in Atlanta and Georgia, Atlanta is a mid-sized city characterized by rapid economic growth, the city has been investing in trails and greenways and schoolyards to create more vibrant and livable neighborhoods. For example, the city invested significantly in the Beltline, and the city has seen pretty significant commercial and residential development around that space. The city at the same time is also investing in many historic and existing neighborhoods to make sure that those places are protected from stormwater surge. So historic Fourth Ward Park, for example, helps reduce peak storm flow by 44 million gallons per day and make sure that the costs, both human and economic, of our environmental challenges are reduced. So Atlanta is a great example of how parks and trails and greenways are all being invested in to help strengthen that economic landscape for the city.
One of the things you mentioned as well was kind of this need for parks to be considered important parts of cities. And I think there was a quote in the press around the report about how parks often had been, and green areas had often been considered nice to haves, but that mentality has to change. Do you feel like it's beginning to change?
What we've seen over the last few years with COVID and people being able to move more with hybrid work is that park spaces are highly valued, that people do make decisions about where they want to live or where they want to raise their family based on the environment. And parks are a key part of that. We have seen a lot of interest and support from our mayor partners, from our community partners, from our private sector in investing in these spaces. We actually have some work coming out around the role of private development and creation of parks, and have found that a pretty significant number of parks created over the last few years have been created through that public-private partnership. And while we do see a lot of really promising action, we need more. So we are calling on mayors and city leaders to truly prioritize parks, to make sure that they are fully funded, and to make sure that that cross-sector collaboration to help parks not just be siloed into the Parks Department, but really be a core part of our city livability strategies, that all still needs significant action.
You mentioned at the beginning, how parks help control the urban heat island effect and help with air quality off the back of, hurricanes and storms. Also, they are powerful in preventing flooding during storms and to help with that stormwater. So I'm curious about, that side of things. Is the public aware of the benefits of having green space, and are developers being a bit more considered about including parks and greenery in their projects?
When we talk to residents, we work with communities very closely anywhere that Trust for Public Land works. And we often hear these amazing stories about how a park space has impacted somebody's upbringing. They remember those moments going to a park as a child. But the sum of what a park can provide for a community, I think, is on the whole pretty undervalued. And that when we think about all of the amazing things that parks and public spaces can provide, we tend to discount that. It's not, I think, being accounted for in the way that it needs to be. Parks are chronically underfunded. So we know that the reality of the situation is that parks are not being valued when it comes to policy and funding in the way that they truly need to. In the case study cities that we looked at, there are some promising glimmers there, with many of the cities investing at a higher per capita than a lot of their peers. For example, Atlanta spends about $137 per capita over the past 3 years. Plano's at $141. Minneapolis spends $191 per capita, and that's over the last 3 years. And those are significantly higher than the median that we see in the US. So those are all promising, but we need more, and we need a lot of other cities to be looking at these examples and following suit. Your question about whether private development is also seeing this and investing, that was something this report very intentionally explored. And we were very happy to see, it was really amazing to hear in the interviews conducted that there was a lot of private sector interest and support and action to create parks. And what's really important is, as cities continue to redevelop or develop, that we continue to see that public-private partnership to ensure that in any private development that happens, we are thinking about what the public space is, what is the interaction with the public realm, and to ensure that those spaces are created in a way that meet community needs and are activated and welcoming. One example I'd love to just flag is in Plano, Texas. Plano was once a small bedroom community. It's really been growing. is well known for having a lot of corporate campuses as well, and has been working to redevelop those, reactivate that land alongside the private partners. And the city has really taken a proactive approach to reaching out to those private audiences, those private partners, to make sure that those actions and the private land that's being redeveloped and activated also serves public good.
Making the connection with the struggles and challenges with office vacancies downtown and the population decline is almost like a rebranding of a solution that has always been there, which is a very clever way of perhaps making sure that this is an issue that people started paying attention to. Was that the intentionality behind it as well?
I think parks play such an essential role in everything from our housing livability to our economies. And our cities have gone through these different phases. If you think about like the City Beautiful movement, we have gone through eras in time where we invest in parks because we recognize their health benefits, for example, and that wanes and then it waxes again. And I think what we are hoping to see is more consistency and increase in funding and support for parks in the long term. Creating a park is amazing, but making sure that we have funding and the capacity and the infrastructure to sustain those spaces and continue to build new ones, fill that park equity divide is essential. One thing we hear pretty often from our partners in general is that there is a need for case making, for understanding what specific activities, what types of parks, what kind of engagement, what really helps lead to the most benefit. And so there is still a need for more research and information to help improve practice among a lot of different audiences. And I think that there's a real unevenness in what the understanding of the benefits of parks. So making sure that we are able to reach all audiences, speak everyone's language, and talk about the role of parks in different sectors is a really important way of increasing that cross-sector work that's essential for these strong, healthy communities.
Bianca Clark there, speaking with Carlotta Rebello, and my thanks to both of them. Next up, we head to one of the most German cities in Canada, Kitchener, which last month wrapped up the largest Oktoberfest celebrations in North America. The German heritage present here is also celebrated with the city's downtown glockenspiel, which attracts daily audiences to its shows and has locals humming to themselves long after the 23 bells have finished chiming their many recognisable tunes. One regular contributor, Mandy Sinclair, spent much of October living just down the road from this iconic piece of public realm in Kitchener, and she sent us this report, what it means to the locals.
It's a familiar tune to many, and even more so to those passing through downtown Kitchener, Ontario, on their way to work or school, and wandering by the downtown glockenspiel, where 23 bells chime the tune 4 times per day. The glockenspiel, elevated 4 meters off the ground, provides an outdoor theatrical stage of sorts, one that tells the story of the Brothers Grimm's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, all while recalling the city's German heritage. The city hasn't always been known as Kitchener, though. Previously, it was known as Berlin, which attests to the scale of the German settlement in the area at the turn of the 20th century. The names of nearby towns paid homage to British roots, including the bordering city of Waterloo, known as Kitchener's Twin City, and nearby Cambridge, the 3 cities known collectively as the Tri-Cities, given their proximity. However, the city's name changed from Berlin to Kitchener in 1916 during the Great Wars, though there was talk that the city may revert back to its original name following the war. But over 100 years later, the city remains known as Kitchener. And the 23-bell glockenspiel has been a fixture in town since 1976, with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs its main animatronic show. But in 2009, the structure was put into storage until a new home could be found. During that time, the glockenspiel was refurbished, and fittingly, it was returned to its original location in 2015 at the corner of Benton and King Street. With the refurbishments came some upgrades, lighting fixtures for shorter days during the winter months, and a revised repertoire that included more than just the songs needed to animate the story of Snow White over the course of the 7-minute show. Nevertheless, the glockenspiel's main show continues to recount the popular Brothers Grimm fairy tale, And like a typical workday, the first show kicks off at 9 a.m. before wrapping up for the day at 6 p.m. In between, the curtain rises for a midday show and an afternoon matinee of sorts at 3, attracting audiences young and old and even traffic waiting for the lights to change on the busy thoroughfare to watch as Dog, Grumpy, Happy, Sneezy, Sleepy, Bashful, and Dopey make their way across the stage en route to work. Quite fitting, really, as in addition to recalling German heritage, the city's industrial heritage is clearly still on display. Bordering the downtown core are industrial buildings that once housed rubber and button factories, the British Empire's largest tannery, and even a pork producer who still remains in business. With all this bustling downtown, it's no surprise that at the turn of the century, before the city's name change, the term Busy Berlin was used to describe the industrial town. Today, the city's population has diversified, and sky-high glass condominium buildings are popping up like mushrooms, hovering over the 2- and 3-story commercial, residential, and industrial buildings that line downtown Kitchener from bygone days. The Kitchener Innovation District has replaced a more industrial past with tech giants including Google, OpenText, Oracle, and even BlackBerry having set up shop alongside smaller tech startups in the downtown core. Before the first show of the day wraps up, one passerby tells me that she's often humming the familiar hi-ho, it's off to work we go, as she makes her way to the office, having caught a snippet of the familiar tune en route. And when the curtain drops in between showtimes, the crests of 5 German clubs who founded the Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest, an annual event that dubs itself as Canada's greatest Bavarian festival, are displayed, providing yet another reminder of the city's cultural heritage.
My thanks there to Mandy Sinclair for that report. Now, from one iconic centrepiece of a city to a piece of the public realm that is often overlooked, we turn our focus to the art of letter carving. The artists behind this ancient craft have cut their designs into significant buildings and created monuments and memorials all over the world. But what is often overlooked is the effort that goes into nurturing this art form, which finds itself regularly on and off the endangered crafts list. Well, after visiting an example of letter carving just down the road from our London studio, we invited the sculptor behind this particular piece, Annette Sterling, and the chair of trustees of the Lettering Arts Trust, Mark Node, into the studio to speak with Carlotta Rebello. Carlotta started by asking Annette what exactly a letter carver does and how she came to be one herself.
Letter carving is actually carving something by hand with a chisel and a mallet which you have designed yourself, i.e. drawn onto the stone. I went to art college, and I went to art college in Holland first, and I did graphic design there. And when I came to England, the college I went to was just starting a lettering course. And so after doing a year just checking everything out, they said, well, why don't you join the lettering course? And I thought, yes, that's lovely. So I did.
And it's quite an ancient craft. Is it having a comeback?
I think so, yes. The City and Guilds of London Art School had this lettering course. It ran for quite a long time, so we trained lots of people. I mean, later went on to the staff to help teaching. And then it closed down. But since then, a lot of our ex-students have started training other people as well. And now the Lettering Arts Trust has really stepped into the breach and is training loads of people.
Well, that seamlessly allows us to bring Mark into the conversation. Tell us about Lettering Arts Trust and what's the main goal of the organisation?
Okay, well, the Lettering Arts Trust was set up in 1988. And the main thrust of that was to put people who wanted to commission particularly a memorial for a loved one, in touch with artists who could do it for them. And that's still at the heart of what we do today. We have around 50 or 60 lettering artists on our register who do memorial commissions and other commissions. So that's the core of what we do at the Lettering Arts Trust. But in order to make sure it's sustainable, we also promote the craft and we train the next generation. So we run an apprenticeship scheme. We have 2 apprentices who are in their second year at the moment. And we also have a shorter training program, which is our journeyman program, which allows people to study particular aspects of the craft. Say they want to improve their italic lettering or something like that. We provide grants for artists to be able to do that.
Well, it's important as well to mention that this is a craft that keeps being on and off the endangered crafts list. And it's curious to hear you then describe how it's used a lot for memorials. But is the goal here that people start commissioning lettering artists to other types of uses so that it expands the portfolio and therefore you can keep on teaching and passing down the knowledge to other generations?
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, the focus of the Lettering Arts Trust is on the more domestic work, but the artists who we work with all take on wider commissions for architectural work or smaller domestic work, depending on what they want to do, and also memorials on a civic scale. So things like the Bomber Command Memorial on Piccadilly. The lettering on that was done by Richard Kindersley.
Annette, we visited, just before the two of you came to our studio, we visited some of your work that's there near Marylebone High Street. And it's curious that we've been talking about memorials because while it's not a memorial per se, it's paying homage to what it used to be on that location. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that project, how you came to be involved, and what is the process of getting letter carving into a building?
I was contacted by the architects, and that building had been part of the BBC. The Radio Times used to be in that building, and BBC London, I think, and some other things. So to start with, we were going to put a large, very large inscription on the bottom half commemorating the BBC, but at that time there was the Jimmy Savile scandal. So when the proprietor, the people who paid for the building saw that, they said, no, we can't do that. So then there was a rumour that Handel had played there, so we went on this escapade of doing a circle with Handel on it, but there was no proof to be found. So the third one was the one that's up there. Once upon a time, it was a pleasure garden, the bit that the building is on, and so we commemorated that. And the architect really loved the idea of a spiral, so it was quite interesting to actually try and design the spiral dry on the piece of paper, which then had to fit onto the wall, because the wall, of course, is made out of blocks of stone. It's got little bits of cement in between, which you have to take into account when you start carving.
And the carving happens off-site and then gets assembled, or do you sculpture onto the building itself?
We carved it in November 2017, I think it was. So it was not very warm, and we had to build a plastic hut to keep the water off the inscription, because obviously you've got to draw it on, and by the time you've got it drawn on and it rains, it will all come off. So yes, we had a very beautiful plastic hut to sit in, and we asked them to dig a really big hole for our feet so that we could actually sit lower down in order to carve, because otherwise we'd have to lie on our backs to do that, which wouldn't have been very helpful. But yeah, it was all hand done, hand drawn on, hand carved. We did have a generator to get the main bulk of the stone out, and then we finished off by hand.
What is, I guess, the feeling for yourself as an artist to see your work become part of history of London, hopefully for generations and generations to see, the same way we now look at ancient carvings in buildings? So I'm just curious, what does that feel like for yourself?
It's strange, because the most wonderful thing is the actual doing it itself. And then you come past and you sort of think, oh yes, I did that. But one is always on to the next thing, trying to make something else. So yes, it's the actual doing of the thing, trying to work out how to do it, the carving, and then seeing that it's okay, you did all right there. That's the most important thing, I think.
It must be quite daunting to realise a mistake last minute.
Oh, no, you can't. You definitely can't make it.
Always the question that's asked of letter carvers is, what if you make a mistake? And the answer is, you don't make mistakes.
Just cannot afford to.
It's not easy to rectify, is it?
I did once carve an inscription at Gloucester Park Underground Station, and there was some royal that had come to open it, and I actually wrote His Royal Hickness, and I hadn't noticed. And somebody stood behind me and said, "You're not really going to carve His Royal Hickness, are you?" And I said, "Oh my God, hadn't seen it." Fortunately, I was on the line below, because usually you start carving at the bottom and go upwards, and could redraw it. And I wish I knew who the guy was. I would have bought him a pint.
And Mark, you alluded earlier there about, the importance of passing down the craft to a new generation. In what ways is the trust doing that, and why is it important to protect this craft?
The craft itself enhances the built environment. I mean, there's a big difference between a hand-done inscription like the one we're talking about with Annette and the work she's done in the National Gallery and other places, and a mechanically cut typeface, for instance. I mean, that's an important distinction, is that a lot of letter carving, it's not a typeface, it's a hand-drawn letter form. So each letter is different. So you get that humanity coming through. And it just provides a little more warmth than a mechanically cut inscription.
I wonder how much of it also connects us now here in this moment as well with the past. I don't know, looking back, to probably Roman times in London, the letter carvings that happened in buildings that some of them we can still see in ruins around the world. So I wonder how much of that thread is present on your mind when you are doing your work.
Yes, I think it is very much there. Because obviously one has gone, been to Italy, seen the inscriptions, and always very surprised that the Italians are not really that interested, because they've got masses of really beautiful things. And you know that they're there, so whatever you're trying to make has to live up to the best, really, which is what one tries to do. But can't all be Roman. Sometimes you have to have sans serif letters, and that's equally good, as long as you think about it and space it properly, and it's fit for purpose. It should really fit where it is going rather than just put anything onto a building.
The project we've seen today, that's in stone. I have a question about the materials. Do you have a favorite type of material? We know that wood is another one. What are some of the materials where letter carving thrives?
Yes, it's very difficult to carve into steel, say, but you can laser cut. So I do quite a lot of drawings and then get them laser cut. So they still have, handmade feel, but obviously it isn't cut by hand. But my favourite material probably is Portland stone, because it is slightly softer. The granite is incredibly hard and takes a long time to carve, whereas the Portland stone you can get a really good inscription in a reasonable time.
And I guess perhaps just finally, I'll go to you first, Mark, but what are some of your pieces around London that our listeners who are tuning into this conversation might go around and visit?
One particular piece which is easy to find is the COVID memorial at the North Transept entrance to St Paul's Cathedral, which was done by one of our artists, Charlotte Howarth, recently. And that's large-scale letters in wood, and they're gilded in that entrance hall. And then that lettering has been used for other inscriptions and signs around there. So that's an easy one to find. It's a very beautiful piece of lettering. And then in the basement, in the crypt of St Paul's, there are a couple of other ones by a slightly older generation. There's Richard Kindersley has something down there, and John Skelton has several pieces down there.
Annette, I'll turn the question now to you. We've mentioned already one of your works. Yeah. I'll give you a chance to mention another one as well, if you'd like to include that as something that our listeners...
Can I go to Glasgow?
You can go wherever you like.
Because Ian Hamilton Finlay there commissioned some Greek and the translation onto 2 bridge pillars which were left over. It's on the Broomielaw and it's on the river. It says, "All greatness stands firm in the storm," in both Greek and English. And we went up this ladder, up the pillar, and there was a boat standing by. So it was a great adventure in itself. But it was an arts project, and it's there forever. And I thought the phrase was just marvellous.
My thanks to Annette Sterling and Mark Node there, speaking with Carlotta Rebello. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. Remember that you can get new editions of the show every week. Just follow us through your favourite podcast provider. You can also subscribe to Monocle magazine for regular reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism. Just visit monocle.com. This episode of The Urbanist was produced by Carlotta Rebello and by David Stephens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.